Is this the best choice when it comes to a residential chainsaw? Well, that's a tough question to answer, and it most likely depends on what your needs really are. However, there is one fact that can't be denied. If you want to go with the status quo, choose a gasoline chainsaw. But if you feel like taking a huge risk, choose a battery chainsaw. However, you may not like being a guinea pig for the companies that make them. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this very orange chainsaw, and the problem is that after servicing the carb, it's not running the way it should. Now, the rule that I try to follow is, after servicing the carb and it fails to work like it should, I'll then just replace the carb. But if you don't think my approach makes any sense, then you're welcome to go back through the carb if you have the time. Now, this is not a complete repair video. In fact, this is a revisit of an older repair from years ago. So if you want to see the actual repair video, click on the link at the top of the screen. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about the advantages of a gasoline chainsaw that makes it a much better option than a battery one. Of course, I'm not going to dismiss the advantages of a battery chainsaw, the first of which is the lack of any real maintenance. Now, I say real maintenance because you still have to take care of the battery one as well, otherwise you will have problems with it just like a gasoline one. So just what kind of care am I talking about? Well, there's still a bar and chain that you have to keep in working order. Otherwise, you'll find that the chain isn't being oiled like it should, and also over time the cutters will start to dull, and without sharpening will make cutting anything extremely difficult. So besides having to do some maintenance to the bar and chain, the biggest draw towards battery chainsaws is of course not having to start them. So as long as the battery has some power in it and the electronics controlling the saw are working, with a single squeeze of the trigger, it's gonna run. But as you might have guessed, what happens when either of those isn't working like it should be? Well, the battery is the biggest drawback to battery chainsaws. They are sensitive to being damaged and will also lose some capacity over time due to being neglected. The other issue is that batteries are very expensive to replace, or if you want a spare one, which I hate to tell you, you're definitely going to need one. So is getting a gasoline chainsaw going to overcome the problems with batteries? Nope, not at all. In fact, you're going to realize that the problems don't go away, but instead change to different ones. That's right, you're just trading one set of problems for a different set, so it's up to you which one you can live with. So instead of taking care of batteries and buying extra ones, you'll have to worry about mixing fuel, replacing spark plugs and air filters, and off-season storage, which is the biggest problem I've seen so far with them. It never fails. Someone will buy a chainsaw to deal with storm damage, and when they're done, will put it away incorrectly, only to realize that it won't start when the next storm rolls around. So is the problem with the chainsaw not starting the fault of the machine or the user? Well, no matter how much you argue the case, it always seems to be the fault of the machine and not the user, even though the owner's manual would say something differently. So after that statement, why would I say that a gasoline machine is better than a battery one? Well, it boils down to cost. If your chainsaw won't start and you take it down to a small engine repair shop, it could cost about $80 to $150 to fix it. So how is that any better than the cost of a replacement battery? Easy, at least you have the option to have it done cheaper. If you're feeling adventurous, you can try to do the work yourself, or if you know someone else who isn't the repair shop that's done it before, you can ask them to do it for you. Now, I can already hear a lot of people shouting that they are not mechanically inclined, and that's fine. Just go down to the store, pick up a pack of root beer, and head over to a person that seems to always be in their garage working on something and ask them for help. And if for some reason they can't help you, they might know someone else who can, and at a reasonable price as well. So for the price of a pack of root beer, an aftermarket carb, and some money for their time, it should still be much cheaper than a trip down to the small engine shop. Of course, if you don't want to interact with strangers, well, I can't blame you there. So in that case, go with a battery electric one and buy a replacement battery when the time comes. Now, there is one nasty surprise that might be waiting for you when you go that route, and it happens more often than you think. If for some reason it takes a couple of years before you need to buy another battery, you might just find out that your machine was not very popular and spare parts for it are impossible to find. Now, the reason why this could happen is because since the battery market is always growing and evolving, the models that don't do very well will be discontinued. Now, that's very bad news for you because it might force you to buy models and brands that might be out of your budget. Unfortunately, this also applies to gasoline machines as well. However, I would always recommend that you buy a brand name, either gasoline or electric, from a brand that's been around for at least a decade, if not more. Now, the reason why is because a lot of the no-name brands have only recently popped up in the market. So picking a brand that maybe your parents would know about sounds a bit more reassuring than one you've never heard of before. So as of right now, you can either get a brand name gasoline chainsaw for the same price as a decent electric version. Now I say decent because there are lower power versions that are still quite capable, however they don't have the power of the more expensive ones. What that means is, as long as you don't buy a spare battery, choosing either power source is a toss-up, meaning they're both a good buy. I know that sounds a bit anticlimactic to say that either one is a good choice, but those are the facts. However, there is more to it than just the purchase price that we have to consider. Now, I'm not going to get into the environmental aspect of either one, but it's a known fact that getting the materials to make batteries is not very kind to the environment. And of course, using a gasoline machine doesn't help the situation either. But here's the way that I look at it. Buying a battery saw already puts a measurable impact on the environment, whereas a gasoline saw will impact the environment while it's being used. So take that information however you want to, but it is something to think about when deciding on which one to buy. Now, if you hadn't figured it out, I'm extremely frugal, meaning most of my decisions are based upon money, but more specifically, good use of my money. So let me clarify, I'm not just going to buy the cheapest chainsaw on the market. Instead, I'm going to get the one that's going to last and is at a fair price. Now what that means is I could end up buying a mid-priced chainsaw from a well-known brand and not a no-name brand. Of course, the same rules apply whether I'm buying new or used. Now, if you thought I was picky when it comes to buying new items, you're not going to like my approach when it comes to used ones either. So as you might have guessed, most often when buying used machines, I don't really care if they work, and that's because more than likely I'm going to be able to fix them. Of course, the price has to reflect its condition, so when buying a chainsaw that does not work, whether battery or gasoline, it's got to be cheap. But what if I decided, hey, I really don't want to buy a fixer-upper, but instead a working machine? How much would it have to be? Of course, it would have to depend on what model and brand the machine is, and also what kind of condition it's in, but for the most part, it would have to be less than half the price of a new one. So of course, when buying something that's being sold as a working chainsaw and is half the price of a new one, I'm going to have to try it out. And if it doesn't start or has problems starting, I'll then try and negotiate the price down or just walk away from the deal. It just really depends on the situation. This of course would apply to whether or not it's gasoline or battery, but there is one big difference with the battery, and that's time. So for a gasoline chainsaw, just making sure that it starts and runs is about 75% of the test, while the other part would be how it works. But for a battery chainsaw, I need to know that when I squeeze the trigger that it'll last for quite some time and not for just 2 minutes. This is of course the biggest problem with most items that use batteries. Items like your smartwatch, cell phone, laptops, or even your EVs. How long will they last before the battery pack runs out of power? So for me personally, not knowing when a machine will stop and leave me stranded in the middle of a project makes me very apprehensive to choose it. Just think about it, as long as a gasoline machine starts and runs, even when it's not running up to where it needs to be, will still work until it runs out of gasoline. Or would you rather pick the one that's faster and more powerful right next to it? However, you never know when it's going to stop on you. So at my job, we have these service carts that are powered by batteries or propane. Unfortunately, the propane ones don't run very well, probably because they need tune-ups, but with the full tank, they'll generally last 2 to 3 days. However, the battery ones are at least twice as fast getting to speed and are much quieter, but I'm sure you know what I'm about to say next. Just like the gasoline ones, they're lacking maintenance, and because of that, the batteries don't hold much of a charge, meaning you have to charge them at least once a day per shift for at least an hour or so. And because of that fact, most choose to use the propane ones despite them not working at their best. And that's pretty much how I feel about the gasoline versus battery debate. I like batteries, but I can live with the gasoline ones. Now, to be honest, it really doesn't matter which one you choose. Now, if you're worried about the environment or have a shoulder issue, then get the battery version. Now, if you're still able to pull on a rope and you're on a budget, I'd recommend the gasoline one. However, whichever one you choose to get, don't forget there's going to be problems with either one, so just be ready to look in your owner's manual that you probably already thrown away. So my question is, which one would you choose, a battery or gasoline chainsaw, and why? I don't think I have to remind you which one I'm choosing. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.